Hey, it's Luminostic. I know it's been a few days since I've made a video. I apologize for that. But we're going to try to make a good one today to make up for it. So do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe, and today's video is going to be sort of a continuation of the Synchronicity Tales Part 1 that I made. It's not necessary. If you haven't seen that video, you'll totally be able to get some value from this one without going back and reviewing it. Although if you're interested in the story and where all this is coming from, I definitely would recommend going back and watching the other video. This is actually a pretty long story. That's why I'm breaking it up into so many segments. There's going to be quite a few of them ultimately. And before it was all done, I had basically used, synchronicity and consciousness, I guess, to find famous people that I wanted to talk to. Like I said in the other video about, the encounter with Danny Carey from Tool, for example, this was not a matter of like stalking. It was purely a matter of like wanting to talk to them and then finding myself doing it. So that's another video if you're interested in synchronicity. And again, this isn't just, I'm not doing this for the sake of storytelling necessarily and just entertainment. I'm hoping to sort of communicate like how it is that the universe communicates, and when I was able to make the correct interpretation, and also sometimes I made incorrect interpretations, or perhaps projected and saw what I wanted to see. One of the big dangers of learning to use your intuition to this degree is that, for example, you can start to lose the ability to discern between actual intuition and what Aleister Crowley called wish demons, which is of course just having a thought, wanting to believe it. You have confirmed that your intuition is capable of leading you to things, that consciousness is capable of generating or influencing energy in such a way as to constrain particles to create a reality for you, basically, if my understanding of the physics and everything is correct. Eventually we'll talk about some of the limitations to this too. Obviously as we expand our awareness and expand our consciousness, the idea is if you change your consciousness, you change your reality. So it's very important to remember that the biggest mistake that the magician makes is to think that magic can do more for him than it can. And of course that just refers to a lot of people will try to use consciousness to make things that are impossible happen. They will fail to create a conduit for the energy to flow so that they're able to actually have avenues for manifestation. So we're still working within the confines of natural law, etc., etc. So at any rate, kind of diverging a little bit there, and I really do want to stay on track and get to the story. And so what we're talking about today is fear, and what I learned about how that can affect your process, why it is that when you come into fifth dimensional reality, as we've come to call it, I don't know that that's what it is, but I think it's important that we have some kind of labels to make reference. So we'll say that when you're living a life with another dimension of awareness, the idea is that the mind is generating things more quickly, that your powers of manifestation have increased. So if you have a lot of fear, if you have anger, if you have jealousy, if you have all these things, you're going to draw them to you. And so during this period that I've referenced, where all of these synchronicities were going insane, I'll do a little recap of the other video real quick. I think one of the earliest things involved a ruler. We were talking about the number 11, and the girl was drawing, and there's two 11s on the ruler, and then I was at work, and she called me and said that there were bears in the front yard, and then bears fell out of the insulation where I was working. It made no sense, and it happened with several witnesses. So we're talking about, coincidences of extremely high improbability, that the timing was exquisite, and they all had a meaning and directed me sort of as to like where to look next for the next piece of the puzzle, or, contributed in some way to the decoding of this puzzle, this metaphysical puzzle, and also the process of empowerment that I was heading towards, I guess you would say, like the apex of the intensity of this synchronicity storm. And so during this period, I would occasionally hear like a voice in my head that would sort of guide me to things, and it would explain things to me. And it wasn't exactly like friendly, and it wasn't hostile either, but it was very brutal, like a Dutch uncle. I've actually heard other people describe what I believe is the same voice. And as Terence McKenna said, it is no accomplishment to hear a voice in the head, but to figure out if it is telling the truth and act in accordance with what it is communicating to you that's a whole nother story. So, you know, I was very cognizant of the fact that, you know, this is a voice in the head. You have to be objective. You know, I was smart enough and had enough presence of mind to try to, you know, have some tests put into place and some safety measures to make sure, you know, am I just cracking up or is this legitimate? And when this voice consistently was able to lead me to things and told me things that came true, you know, I started to give it a little bit more credence and actually listen to what it was telling me. And so at one point during this process, it started telling me to, well, that's not exactly right. It didn't need to tell me anything. I just kind of knew. I didn't even notice till the third night, but exactly at midnight, every night for 7 days, I would put on my coat. I was living in Colorado, and I would go outside, and I didn't know what I was going to find. I didn't know exactly why I was doing it. I started to understand by the third or fourth night, the general gist of it was that I was going to be facing fears. And so the first thing the input that it had was that if you have no fear, nothing can harm you. And I thought, well, that's a little bit extreme, but it said, no, you just don't understand the degree to which your consciousness is actually generating your experience of life. You can actually be more or less totally immune from the possibility of harm and loss and all of these things, but it has to be absolute. If this energy of fear is not generated within you, you will not attract anything that can harm you. And so in order to prove this to me, it started guiding me through this thing every night. And so the first night, I'd always been afraid of like going really close to the edge of cliffs, and I went outside and, you know, it's pitch dark, and there were cliffs all around the house. So I just looked at one and I just climbed right up the face of it. And I'm not an experienced rock climber at all. In fact, I'd shied away from it because I hated heights. I had no interest in rock climbing, and it was pretty steep and pretty sheer, and I had absolutely no fear. Climbed to the top of this cliff in complete pitch black, totally understood what it was about and what I was doing. Went back down. Of course, everything was fine. You know, I think I sat up there for a while, and, you know, there's probably this long process of I was constantly in communication with, I don't know what. I've never made up my mind. You know, is it the higher mind of the collective human race? Is it an entity? Is it just part of the subconscious? You know, sometimes I think the answer to all of that is just yes. But without, you know, diverging again too much from the story. So the next night, same time, you know, and I hadn't noticed yet that I was doing this at the same time. I just kind of thought all of a sudden I should go for a walk. So this time I climb up the same cliff, I get up into the woods, and I've never been particularly afraid of snakes. That wasn't the lesson here necessarily, but I had my dog with me, and we're walking around, and all of a sudden I hear like right next to my ankle, a rattlesnake, and I'd never encountered one in Colorado before. And so I jumped. I didn't know that it was possible for, you know, I mean, I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that I jumped, you know, 8 feet up and 10 feet over, 12 feet over. I mean, incredible, you know, probably from the adrenaline rush or whatever. And so I had my dog with me, and my dog starts going nuts right in the snake's face, and I'm screaming, you know, Diesel, Diesel, no, don't, my little pit bull, you know, and I love that dog with my whole heart. So I really, you know, it was terrifying, but he listened to me somehow, which was incredible. The dog was incredible, but the connection I had with the animal during this period, I think, was enhanced as well. Some kind of subconscious, telepathic, intuitive thing. I would stop calling him vocally and just kind of like imagine him running up in my head, and he'd be right there. And you know, you kind of had to be in my head and see it to really understand how strange it was. Because you could say that's just a coincidence, the dog just... But I mean, I would picture him coming through a particular, you know, between these two trees with the leaves, you know, whatever, and it would be exactly that when he ran up. And I'm still not saying that 100% it wasn't coincidental, but I do not really feel that to be true. And I think within the context of everything else that was happening, and subsequent experiences I've had with human-animal telepathy, at any rate, so I think that may have had something to do with calming the dog down and getting him away from the snake. But I noticed, and this was the teaching from Great Spirit or whatever it is that I was dealing with, as soon as my energy calmed and I found my center again, the snake, you know, my fear, I could feel it vibrating, and the tail just of the snake went as soon as I was calm, the snake's tail stopped rattling, and the timing was perfect, like just perfectly synchronized. And then I realized, you know, if I don't react with any fear, none of these snakes out here will harm me. So, and neither will anything else, ultimately, was the teaching here. So, and please do stick with this video to the end, because the last thing that happened in this process is really the doozy. So, I I encountered several more snakes, stayed totally calm. I got right in their faces just to prove to myself that I could, and that this was, you know, repeatable and testable. And so, you know, I go home and I don't even recall what happened every single night. You know, it was a different fear every night for 7 days. So the last one was by far the craziest synchronicity. I had walked out to this field with a friend of mine that I was kind of helping go through some stuff. He was having some confusion about his sexuality. He was Christian, so he had a lot of self-loathing because he wasn't comfortable with his homosexuality, or bisexuality rather, I guess. And we walked out to this field so I could kind of talk him through it. And I just, at the end of it, I said, you know, I've been doing this thing every night, and I just realized it's about midnight where I go out and face a different fear every night. And I told him, you know, that nothing that you, if you fear nothing, nothing can harm you. And as we're walking out into the street, mind you, we're in the middle of nowhere in Colorado. I'd lived there for a year, and I'd seen maybe one cop ever. And so we both have our dogs. We walk out on the street, and I said, you know, I think probably the last major fear that I haven't faced is cops. As soon as the word cops came out of my mouth, red and blue lights, instantly, and I'm like, what? You got to be kidding me. You know, at first I thought I've got to have cracked this. That could not have just happened. So I turn around and look, and sure enough, there's a cop car. I look at Ty to make sure that, you know, he actually is registering this as well. And I had a second of fear, and then I realized, whoa, dude, you're being given an opportunity to demonstrate that what you're speaking is actually true. So I walk over to the cop's window and leaned in and just started saying the craziest things I could possibly think of to him. Like, you know, I'm Jesus Christ, and if you don't believe me, I forgive you, or something crazy like that. And, you know, just all this really whacked out stuff. And, but, you know, just totally fearlessly, and you had to be there. I couldn't really create it. I did it in really like a Jedi kind of, it flowed really nicely at the time. And, so at one point, you know, oh, the cop said, are those your dogs in the street? And I said, I don't think that really concerns us right now. We have more important stuff to talk about. So I told him that I had, you know, DMT in my pocket. I was high on DMT, which wasn't true, but I was just trying to confess to all these crimes to see if I could provoke him to do anything, but with no fear. And so he said, I've never even heard of DMT. And I'm like, come on, you're a cop. And I'm like, well, that's my house over there, and I've got like 77 too many pot plants, you know. I have a card for 99, but I've got like 100 and whatever. And he's like, I don't really care what you do in the privacy of your own home. And I actually said to him, I'm not in the privacy of my own home. I'm out in the street acting like a lunatic. I look over and I see Ty putting his hands behind his head, like getting ready to get cuffed up, you know. And so I just keep going with this cop, you know. Eventually, I said to him, unless I like reach in this car and take your gun or punch you, you're not going to do anything, are you? And I can't remember the context that I put this stuff in, but I was trying to push him as far as I actually could without absolutely crossing any lines to try to make this point to my friend, you know, and to myself as well. And so at one point the cop is like, is your friend crawling under my truck? So Ty had decided that he's going to mess with the cop too and see exactly how much we can get away with in this fearless state. And at one point, the cop, towards the end of this, he says to me, cop is just a symbol. I'm a person. Can I go home now? I want to go home. And I was like, are you asking me if you're free to go? And he said, yeah, I want to get home to my wife and kids. And he drove away real slow with his windows down and his lights spinning. So the moral of the story is, all of these experiences that I had, you know, they don't necessarily absolutely prove anything, but I would say there's a good bit of circumstantial evidence that if you are completely bereft without fear, you know, bereft of fear, nothing will harm you. And I can't honestly say that anything has harmed me, you know, since I was given that lesson. Also, a really big question, and you know, hopefully you guys will feel inclined to respond to this and give me your ideas, because, you know, it's something I'm looking for your input too. It's not like I know everything and have all the answers. I just had these experiences. So, you know, how did that cop get there? Was that just a coincidence? I mean, the idea that the mind is able to suddenly just materialize a cop, or that there's a higher power that put all this together, I mean, it would have to have been constructed at the beginning of time or something in order for these things like the ruler to be there with the 2 11s right when we're talking about that. And then later, you know, the 1111 became significant when we met with the Native American tribes down in New Mexico to talk about the star tribes. And, you know, ultimately we met interdimensional beings in this whole thing, and that's going to be in later videos. But the point is, you know, how does this stuff happen? What is the mechanism behind it? It's difficult for me to believe that you can come up with an idea in your head and that the energy is able to materialize it that quickly. You know, I have a hard time with that. I think that that could happen, but it seems like it would be a much more slow process. That's why these things take time. You know, a good magician will perform his rituals to influence events start a month in advance, sometimes 3 months, sometimes 6 months. I think the ritual of Abramelin, to make contact with the higher self or the holy guardian angel is 9 months, 6 months or 9 months. So, you know, if you're trying to cause change to occur in conformity with will, then, you know, you generally invest some time before you try to influence the circumstances remotely. And of course I'll make some videos about, you know, the physics out there that supports the idea that we have the ability to influence subatomic particles to actually create circumstances. I wouldn't say the evidence is overwhelming, but there are certainly physicists that at least consider it a possibility, which is, you know, a tremendous development in human history. This merger of mysticism and science, watching them dovetail, is, you know, potentially the solution to almost all of the human race's problems. If we could get rid of, you know, the religions that are sort of like causing tribal warfare, I mean, not sort of, pretty much literally, you know, there's a tremendous amount of potential in these ideas. And, you know, there's, I think, increasing evidence that there's some reality to it all. But as I said, you know, I don't have all the answers. I don't know that we could ever really come up with a perfect answer to how it is that the very moment I told my friend that the only fear that I hadn't faced is cops, the other thing to consider is, why did that cop light us up, turn on his lights, you know, unless he had the intention to actually mess with us? He didn't even mess with us. Why would he light us up if he was just, you know, what, he just wanted to talk because he had nothing to do or something? I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. It's like the universe presented this thing just to allow me to make a point to my friend and to myself, to drive this teaching home to both of us. And, you know, the timing was extraordinary. I literally said cops and lights, you know, and that wasn't the first or the last time that the synchronicities were that improbable and happened anyways. And we're talking about every day, day in, day out, for at least a year. And of course it still happens to this day, but not just with the same intensity, and only because there's no necessity for it. So I hope that everybody's gotten some value from this video. And I think, you know, if I was going to summarize it, it's just that I'm kind of like offering you evidence from my experience that suggests that your mind does create reality, that, you know, if you can abolish fear, then all of the things that you're worried about will go away. And also, you know, be careful about reading too much into this, because if you start thinking you're manifesting stuff and that your mind, your intuition is perfect and mastered, you take it too far and start following your random thoughts down rabbit holes and get yourself in a lot of trouble. And I got myself in some trouble, I would say. So, and we'll get into all that eventually. So thanks a lot for watching. Hit the like button, subscribe. Please donate on Patreon. We really need your support. We've got a lot of irons in the fire. You know, we're trying to go spend a month in the jungle with the Schwar, document the whole thing, and bring that to you. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll get another video out to you guys soon.